Welcome back to the Mentor Show, which offers quick lessons packaged within minisodes for busy founders and startup leaders like you. I'm Adil, and I'm being mentored live and unscripted by Ed, who's built, sold, turned around, and scaled startups all the way to the New York Stock Exchange. He's based in the US, a developed economy, and I'm based in Dubai, a hub within an emerging economy. And we compare notes. This is real talk, no scripts, no theory. Let's get into it. And this is interesting. Now, let's bring in again the employees. You want to give them shares, whether it's the early employees, let's say you want to grant them, and you've got a few advisors, let's say if it's fintech, and you've got someone who has regulatory experience and compliance experience that can help out by being on the advisory board. So I'm assuming you would give that person a grant in equity. How does it work? Do you have to earmark it very early when you start at the beginning, or you have to do it later? And how do you convince the investors if their investors are not convinced? So
Yeah, so usually the option pool, meaning the amount of shares that are going to be allocated to people other than the founders, that in the West, that tends to be a topic of discussion before the first investment happens. So if Adil, you're the founder of the company, and let's say there's three of you, one of the first questions I would ask as a professional investor is, are these all the employees? Yes, it's only three of us. My next question is very critical. How have you divided the shares? Okay. And my ears are very attuned to the answer. If you say to me, oh, we're good friends from elementary school, we've known each other for years, it's a third. That sends red flags for me, because I know damn well as human beings, it is not equal contribution each and every day. Third, that just doesn't work. Okay? Now you have three bosses because everybody is an equal owner. My preference would be to say, how have you divided the equity? And you would say, I'm the founder of the company. I own 80% of the shares. And Mohammed, who I've known since grade school, he owns 5%. And Abdullah, who I've known since college, and he's an engineer and he knows how to build software, he owns 15% because he's my product guy. And Mohammed, he's my marketing person. All right, now I'm seeing some value alignment, right? You're the founder, 80%. Your product person who's going to build software is 15%, which is, by the way, a very high number. We can fine tune this conversation later. And your marketing person who you've just known since childhood is 5%. Okay, now I can get comfortable with that. So then my next question would be, how much have you allocated in equity for new hire employees that are critical to the success of the business? And you might not have any idea, but I might suggest, let's set aside 20%, okay? That's the budgeted pool of shares that you're going to use to entice new hires. Who takes the dilution for that 20%? Because that 20% has to be created from somewhere. 20% comes out of your 80, 20% comes out from Muhammad's 5, and 20% comes out of Abdullah's 15. That creates the pool. And then as soon as I put my investment cash in, you're going to take more dilution. So it's really important when you now start to see the dilutive events that can occur, that you become very, very sensitive at the very beginning of a business of who are you going to give shares to? Second, how much money do you really need? So when an entrepreneur says, I just need $1 million, that's the last money I'm ever going to raise, all you're doing is showing me your naivete, right? It's going to take more cash. You will need more investment. It will cost more dilution. Or you'll get an entrepreneur that says, I only want to raise 5 million one time. I won't need any more money. 5 million is a lot of money. No smart investor is going to hand over $5 million and trust that you are going to do something smart with it. In fact, the odds are you're going to do a lot of stupid things. So when you build out a financial model that predicts how you're going to use the cash, how your sales will grow, how your expenses will be better managed than most, you want to raise just enough money to last you 12 to 18 months. it drives a discipline in behavior in the team to execute. And investors love that because you're reducing risk. I might be willing to write a check for 5 overall, but maybe I'll give you $1 million now, maybe I'll give you 2 million later, and maybe I'll give you 2 million in the third round. Make sense?
Yeah. This is great, very enlightening.
And all this information is out there
Mm.
in different sources, but the
Yeah,
same concept is true.
Yeah, I remember a few years back you recommended to me the Venture Deals course by Brad Phillips.
Jason Mendelson.
Yeah, Jason Mendelson. Yeah. That was an
Yeah.
excellent course that they kept running it for free for a while, and I don't know if they're still there. But yeah, again, we come back to the question now. So 20% are allocated to the employees.
Between 10 and 20%. Yes.
10 to 20%. And we're assuming that we have to decide on that before we bring investor money. And then what happens if I actually do it after bringing the investor money? Am I stuck?
No, you just now have an extra party, the investor, who also has to agree that they are going to be diluted. So let's say in our first round of financing, it's just you and your 2 co-founders. I put in $1 million. We valued the company at 4, post money it's 5. I now have 20%. You and your co-founders have 80% collectively. And then you say, this is the responsibility and the mistake is on my side. But then you say, hey, I've got to go hire a proper VP of sales, and I have to go hire a proper VP of marketing, and I have to go hire some very key engineers to build my software. They're all asking me for equity, and I don't have an equity pool. We need to establish a 10% equity pool, 10% of however many shares outstanding there are in the company. I, as the investor, have to agree to that. And I say, oh yeah, geez, I overlooked the equity pool. So yeah, let's allocate 10%. Well, 10% is going to come out of your 80 and 10% is going to come out of my 20. And that's what creates the 10% pool. It does happen a lot, but the basic practice is the dilution occurs to the existing parties of the company at the time of the investment. In that very first fundraise, the founders will take the entire equity dilution, whatever it is. In the second round, it will be the founders and the investors from the prior round that take the equity dilution, and so on and so forth.
And what if now, again, I'm using it in the context of developing markets and developing economies, where I'm assuming many of these regions have no set standard for enforcing the execution of these grants or the execution of the option of exercising the purchase of an option. I don't know if I'm actually articulating it in the right
No, that's
manner.
correct. Yep, that's correct.
So yeah, so what happens when, let's say, if for any reason I was promised some shares and I joined, and probably I was naive, I haven't signed anything, and I said, you know what, I'll go. I don't know, person A, the founder. So I trust him or her. I'll go with them. And then after a while, I found myself that I'm negotiating again how much I need to be earning. So there is no set valuation. They don't have a valuation yet. And this is very common. Most of the founders sign safe documents. What should I do? Especially in a market that I cannot enforce. There is no legal structure for enforcing these kind of deals of getting options within a company.
Well,
So, yeah.
Unfortunately, as markets develop, and I do choose the word unfortunately on purpose, what you're relying upon is the rule of law and how the law interprets promises made. The other thing you're depending upon is the integrity of the person that makes the statement, here are some shares or here's some equity in the company. And I think that under every circumstance, you need to get that conversation in writing. The way that's typically done here in the US, especially for a young company, is I would provide you an offer letter for your employment. Adil, thank you for the opportunity to work for you or work for me. My offered to you is X amount of base salary, Y amount of bonus, and Z amount of percentage ownership in the business, subject to approval by the board of directors, the formation of an equity incentive plan, which will be completed by a certain date. That's really the best you can hope for here in the West, right? Because many startup companies do not have their plan documents formed at the time that they raise money. And when they start hiring, which is usually faster than the formation of a plan document because of the Internal Revenue Service rules here in the United States or the Inland Revenue Service in the UK, that takes time, 6 months to put together. I can't put my hiring on hold for 6 months. But if I already know that I've got some percentage of equity set aside for key hires, I would then build a budget that says my CFO gets 0.5%. My VP of sales gets 0.5%. My CTO gets 0.25%. However you've allocated those percentage points, I would make them an integral part of the offer letter. But if we go all the way back to the beginning of our conversation 45 minutes ago, everything depends on having a liquid market for your business. If there's no liquidity event, none of this conversation matters.
That's it for this Minisode. Big thanks to Ed and to all of you for tuning in. If this sparked something, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and make sure you share it within your network. Got a question for Ed? Drop it within the comments. See you next time.
Please note, the views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any affiliated organization. The content provided is for informational purposes only and should not be considered as professional advice. We encourage listeners to conduct their own research and consult with relevant professionals before making any business or career decisions.